narrative. In 2017, they released a 2D horror experience called Detention, and it's based on real events during an era in Taiwan's history when political oppression was an absolute nightmare for the people. We're talking about the 1960s, a timeline in which Taiwan was ruled by a government that was very aggressive against any form of communism due to their conflict with China. However, they used martial law extensively, reaching a point where any opposition or criticism was seen as a crime that people should be punished for. The story is about two students who find themselves stuck in an abandoned, nightmarish school. But as they search for escape, the school shifts into a surreal realm filled with vengeful spirits and symbols of aggression. But make no mistake, the apparitions and entities you see are not random, and they actually represent the trauma of people who lived in a society where speaking out could mean going to prison or even death. The two students are suffering from severe paranoia due to their fear of the political regime, which directly affects their decisions in the game. As you progress, you also start to see themes of guilt and regret. Because the shocking part is that one of the students was basically a snitch who reported a teacher to authorities, which led to his arrest, beating, and execution for his political beliefs. This profound, sophisticated plot that relies on realistic details made Detention the best 2D horror game that you can probably ever play. Because everything you see means something, and it usually hides a tragedy. A few years later, Red Candle released Devotion, and in my opinion, this is the most memorable PT-like horror game in the last decade. The timeline is the 1980s in Taiwan, and the protagonist is a man named Feng Yu, a father who once had a stable, happy life with his family. But everything fell apart when his daughter became sick. The spine-chilling aspect in this game is that it uses different timelines to play with your mind, and the entire playthrough is about Feng Yu witnessing his tragic memories with his family. Just like PT, there's some type of a loop here, and every cycle represents a specific year in Feng Yu's life, containing devastating memories that Feng Yu needs to relive in the form of flashbacks or hallucinations. Every time he enters the house, he finds clues and items that highlight different sides of his past life, including his wife's career, his financial collapse, and his daughter's sickness. The house can also reshape itself to manifest how he used to live with his wife, and how they were once happy before the family began to crumble. The reason Feng Yu is seeing all of this is his guilt and regret regarding what he did to his wife and daughter. Because even though he might seem like a caring family man at first, the reality is that Feng Yu lost his mind at some point, and he became abusive toward his wife, forcing her to leave. His attitude shifted over time due to the decline of his career and his feeling of helplessness, especially when his wife became the provider for the family, and she was the one putting food on the table. However, the straw that broke the camel's back was his daughter's disease. Because seeing her suffering in front of his eyes literally drove him insane. Feng Yu loved his daughter so much, and across your gameplay you can see many memories of them together. But these memories range from happy moments to painful nightmares that he wishes to forget. The saddest part is that there's a shocking twist in the ending that will break your heart and reveal to you why the father is suffering mentally. If you want to learn about the entire story, I'd advise you to watch my previous video about the game, where I explained the heavy themes behind the horror and the tragic fate of Feng Yu and his family. Before I end this video, please make sure to subscribe to our new second channel. The link is in the description and we need you there because we use it to host different scary videos. The channel will also be a backup because we got 3 strikes recently and we almost lost this one due to a copyright Karen that we ended up winning against. Anyway, please like this video if you enjoyed it and I hope to see you soon.
Passa lo spazzolino elettrico radiante. La destinatore ispirata dai dentisti avvolge ogni dente e raggiunge i punti dove il manuale non arriva. Per una pulizia 100% più profonda. Perché tutti i sorrisi sono unici. E ora il vivo li pulisce tutti. Ora il vivo. Accetti la pulizia perfetta.
Quali storie racconterà il tuo prossimo viaggio?
The airport was alive with movement, a place where thousands passed through every day, their thoughts filled with the excitement of travel or the anticipation of returning home. Among the crowd were 2 young boys, drawn to the large monitors that displayed flight information. The screens, housed in a towering sign, flickered with numbers and destinations, an ordinary fixture in the bustling terminal. But what seemed like a harmless moment of curiosity would soon unravel into an unimaginable tragedy. A Transportation Security Administration officer had noticed the children moments before a disaster struck. They were gripping the edges of the monitors, their small feet balanced on a metal bar that ran along the bottom of the structure. The sign stood tall and solid. At least, that was what everyone believed. Yet, beneath its sturdy appearance, danger lurked unnoticed. Time moved forward with an eerie inevitability. As the officer passed by, he considered intervening, warning them of the risks, but hesitated, expecting an adult nearby to step in. The boys continued to hold on, unaware of the unseen forces at play, the shifting balance, the mounting tension that would soon break. Then, in a sudden, gut-wrenching moment, the airport was rocked by a deafening crash. A metallic boom echoed through the terminal, shaking the floor as if an unseen force had struck from above. Travelers froze in place, their thoughts shifting from mundane concerns to an overwhelming sense of dread. The towering sign had fallen, trapping the children and their mother beneath its crushing weight. Screams filled the air, piercing through the terminal's usual hum. The TSA officer, who had only just stepped away, felt the impact reverberate through his feet. For a split second, he wondered if an explosion had gone off, but the sight before him told a different, horrifying story. Others rushed toward the fallen sign, struggling to lift it, their hands grasping at the heavy structure that had transformed from an ordinary unyielding force of destruction. Amidst the chaos, emergency responders surged forward, their training
Ciao,
as they assessed the
bambina.
scene. A woman lay injured, her body pinned beneath the wreckage, her cries of agony merging with the panicked voices around her. Beside her, 2 of her sons, once playful and full of life, were now trapped beneath the collapsed structure. The weight of the fallen sign had crushed their small frames, leaving onlookers frozen in helpless horror. A security officer at a nearby checkpoint watched the scene unfold through tear-filled eyes. A passenger he had been assisting moments before now stood trembling, her face streaked with tears. When he asked what had happened, her voice was barely more than a whisper as she recounted the horror she had just witnessed. The realization hit him with a cold, sinking finality. This was no ordinary accident. This was a moment that would leave scars, both visible and unseen, on all who had been present. Medical teams worked feverishly, their hands moving with practiced precision. They fought against time, against injury, against fate itself, but fate had already made its decision. One of the boys, Luke Brissett, did not survive. His mother and brothers, though still breathing, bore the physical and emotional wounds of a nightmarish moment that could never be undone. In the days that followed, the incident sent ripples through the airport community. The once overlooked sign, standing silent and unthreatening for years, had transformed into a symbol of tragedy. Investigators combed through the wreckage, searching for answers. How could something so routine, so unremarkable, turn deadly in an instant? Reports soon revealed the grim truth. The structure had not been secure, its weight far greater than its supports could handle. It had been a disaster waiting to happen, unnoticed by all until it was too late. The tragedy left behind more than just sorrow. It raised urgent questions about safety, about responsibility, about the hidden dangers lurking in everyday spaces. Conversations about structural integrity and airport safety took center stage. But for one grieving family, no amount of discussion could bring back what had been lost. Airports are places of movement, of beginnings and reunions, of goodbyes and new journeys. But on that day, in that moment, it became a place of heartbreak. The echoes of that crash, the weight of that moment, would never fully fade. And as travelers continued to pass through the terminal, glancing absent-mindedly at the screens above, few would ever know the tragic story hidden in the shadows of an otherwise ordinary place. Ever wonder if we're really ready to hand over the steering wheel to artificial intelligence? Well, this next story might make you pump the brakes on that idea. On a quiet night in Tempe, Arizona, on March 18, 2018, a groundbreaking experiment in self-driving tech went horribly wrong. Elaine Hertzberg, a 49-year-old woman, was wheeling her bicycle across the road when she crossed paths with an Uber vehicle traveling at 40 miles per hour. Sounds like the setup for a bad movie, right? Except this was real life, and it turned tragic fast. The Volvo SUV, tricked out with Uber's autonomous driving system, was in self-driving mode with Rafaela Vasquez, a safety driver behind the wheel. Her job? Keep an eye on the car and step in if things went haywire. Spoiler alert, things did go haywire. Here's where it gets even messier. It turns out that Rafaela was distracted, and not just, I glanced at my phone, distracted. She was streaming an episode of The Voice on her phone, yes, really, at the exact moment she was supposed to be monitoring a self-driving car. She looked down at her lap for over 5 seconds and looked up less than a second before the impact. By then, it was way too late. Meanwhile, Uber's AI brain was having an existential crisis, struggling to figure out what Elaine was, a vehicle, a bicycle, an other object. Because she wasn't near a crosswalk, the system failed to predict her path. And when the car finally decided to hit the brakes, it was 1.3 seconds before the crash. Way too late to avoid tragedy. To make things worse, Uber had disabled the car's emergency braking system, putting all the responsibility on the safety driver, who, as we now know, was busy watching TV. The fallout was swift and brutal. This was the first pedestrian fatality involving a self-driving car, and the National Transportation Safety Board's investigation exposed some terrifying oversights. First, Uber's autonomous system didn't recognize jaywalkers, a huge blind spot given how often people cross outside designated areas. Second, there was insufficient training and zero oversight of safety drivers. Rafaela was working alone and distracted for most of her shift, a recipe for disaster. Third, Uber's system didn't alert safety drivers in emergencies, which meant there was no warning when things went wrong. And finally, Uber's advanced technology group had no formal safety plan, no standardized procedures, and no dedicated safety manager. Basically, they were winging it with self-driving cars. Unsurprisingly, the backlash was intense. Uber's self-driving car program in Arizona was suspended, and Rafaela faced legal consequences. She was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, with the charge downgraded to a misdemeanor if she completed her sentence successfully. While she bore some responsibility, the court also pointed to Uber's shocking lack of safety measures as a major contributing factor. After the accident, Uber updated its software to finally recognize jaywalkers, something you'd think would have been a basic feature from the start. So, the next time you hear someone say, self-driving cars are the future, maybe take a moment to wonder, are we really ready? What started as a seemingly harmless decoration became the scene of a tragic and baffling incident. In a quiet suburb of Barcelona, a man lost his life in the most unexpected of places, inside the hollow leg of a massive dinosaur statue. The discovery came on an otherwise ordinary afternoon when a father and son happened to glance inside the towering Stegosaurus. What they saw was unsettling. Something was lodged deep within the structure, something that didn't belong. Alarmed, they quickly called for help. Authorities arrived and soon confirmed the unthinkable. There was a body trapped inside the statue. The victim was a 40-year-old man who had been reported missing just hours earlier. His family had been searching for him, unaware that he was in a place so improbable that no one would have thought to look. Investigators pieced together a chilling theory of what might have happened. They suspected that the man had dropped his phone inside the statue and, in an effort to retrieve it, had crawled headfirst into the narrow opening. But once inside, something went terribly wrong. He became stuck, unable to move, unable to call for help. For hours, perhaps even days, he remained trapped, his fate sealed by an unfortunate accident. The dinosaur, which once stood as nothing more than a quirky decoration outside an abandoned cinema, had unwittingly become a tomb. Firefighters worked carefully to free his body, cutting through the statue's structure to extract him, but it was too late. There was nothing that could be done. Police ruled out foul play, stating that there were no signs of violence. This was a tragic accident, a bizarre twist of fate that had left an entire community in shock. No one could comprehend how such an ordinary object could become the setting for such a heartbreaking event. Questions still lingered. How had the man managed to enter the statue in the first place? Why had no one heard his cries for help? And just how long had he been trapped inside before he was found? The autopsy would provide more details, but for now, all that remained was a haunting sense of mystery. As news of the incident spread, the town was left shaken. The once familiar dinosaur, which had stood as a whimsical landmark for years, had now become a grim reminder of life's unpredictability. What had once brought joy and nostalgia now cast a shadow of sorrow. Though officials assured the public that it was a case of misfortune rather than negligence, the tragedy left many wondering how something so simple could have turned into something so tragic. The statue, once a harmless piece of decoration, would never be seen the same way again. As time passed, the story of the man and the dinosaur would become one of those eerie tales that lingered in whispered conversations, a warning of how quickly the ordinary can turn into the unimaginable. We've all got our guilty pleasures, hot chocolate, Netflix binges, maybe a little too much coffee, but for Natasha Harris, a 30-year-old mother of 8 from Invercargill, New Zealand, her guilty pleasure turned into a deadly obsession. Her love for Coca-Cola wasn't your typical, I need a soda with my burger kind of thing. We're talking 2 gallons of Coke every single day. From the moment she woke up to the moment she went to bed, she was never far from a glass of the fizzy stuff. And it wasn't just a craving, it was a full-blown addiction. Without her usual supply, Natasha would experience withdrawal symptoms like shaking, irritability, and restlessness. But because there were no warning labels on the bottles, her family never thought this everyday beverage could be dangerous, even as her health started to fall apart. For about 6 months before her death, Natasha's health took a serious hit. She was constantly exhausted, often nauseous and frequently vomiting in the mornings. Despite feeling extreme fatigue and a racing heartbeat, she avoided seeing doctors due to a deep fear of them. To make matters worse, her lifestyle wasn't helping. She barely ate, only having a small lunch most days, and smoked around 30 cigarettes daily. Her soda addiction even affected her teeth. They rotted so badly they had to be removed, and some of her kids were born without enamel on their teeth, likely due to her excessive soda consumption during pregnancy. And if you're wondering just how much caffeine she was putting into her system, brace yourself. A single ounce of Coke contains 2.3 milligrams of caffeine, and with Natasha consuming between 2.1 and 2.6 gallons daily, she was taking in around 800 milligrams of caffeine a day, double the safe limit for an average adult. Combine that with her poor diet and smoking habits, and her body was running on empty. On the morning of February 25th, 2010, Natasha's routine started as usual, getting her kids ready for school and having her morning Coke fix. But shortly after, everything changed. She collapsed against a wall in the bathroom, struggling to breathe. Her partner, Christopher Hodkinson, called emergency services and tried desperately to revive her with CPR, but despite his efforts, Natasha passed away at home. The inquest into her death revealed cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat, as the primary cause of death. But it didn't stop there. Doctors also suspected severe hypokalemia, a dangerous condition where potassium levels in the blood dropped too low, likely due to her soda addiction. Potassium is crucial for proper muscle and nerve function, including keeping your heart beating normally. When you overload on caffeine and sugar, they drive potassium into your cells and out of your bloodstream, leaving dangerously low levels where it matters most. In the aftermath, Christopher blamed Coca-Cola for Natasha's death, believing the company should take responsibility for the health risks associated with excessive consumption of their product. But Coca-Cola denied direct responsibility, arguing that while cardiac arrhythmia was the official cause of death, there was no definitive proof that Coke alone was to blame. Still, experts pointed out the sheer volume of liquid Natasha consumed daily, 338 ounces a day, would strain anyone's body, regardless of the beverage. And let's not forget the 4,000 calories she was drinking every day just from Coke, almost double the recommended daily intake. While most people who enjoy soda in moderation don't need to worry, Natasha's story serves as a sobering reminder that even something as ordinary as a soft drink can turn deadly when taken to extremes. So maybe next time you reach for that extra can of Coke, you'll think twice, because no one wants their love of soda to take a dark and dangerous turn. The night had begun like any other, quiet and uneventful. Jane MacDonald, 31, had gone to visit a friend in Airdrie, Lanarkshire, unaware that a tragic accident would soon unfold. While in the kitchen, she slipped, and in a terrible twist of fate, she fell onto a knife that had been left standing upright in the dishwasher. In an instant, an ordinary evening turned into a frantic emergency. The piercing sound of sirens shattered the silence as paramedics rushed to the scene. They worked quickly, doing everything they could before speeding Jane to Monkland's General Hospital. But despite their best efforts, she did not survive. The shocking accident left the neighborhood in disbelief. Strathclyde police confirmed that there was no foul play, just a devastating accident that no one could have foreseen. Officers remained at the scene, their presence a painful reminder of the night's tragedy. The house where the accident occurred belonged to Reverend Sharon Colvin, a Church of Scotland minister. She had yet to speak publicly about the incident, but those who knew her could only imagine the weight of sorrow she carried. Robert Hutton, a former church session clerk, explained that Jane had simply been a guest, caught in an unforeseen and heartbreaking turn of events. Friends and neighbors struggled to process the devastating news, unable to comprehend how such a simple household mishap could have such fatal consequences. The usually quiet cul-de-sac had never witnessed such chaos. Curious neighbors peered through their windows, watching as the flashing emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the pavement. One resident recalled seeing 4 or 5 medics rush into the house, their faces tense with urgency. They did all they could, but the woman they wheeled out in the ambulance never came back. Some onlookers murmured among themselves, wondering if anything could have been done differently to prevent such an accident. Tragically, this was not an isolated incident. 6 years earlier, a 12-year-old boy in Northampton had lost his life in a similar way, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers within everyday household routines. Even the most mundane objects, when left in the wrong position, could turn deadly in a split second. Safety experts stressed that such accidents, while rare, were not unheard of. They urged people to take extra precautions, emphasizing the importance of even the smallest safety measures in the home. Following Jane's untimely death, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, ROSPA, issued an urgent warning. If possible, always place knives with the blade facing downward in the dishwasher, a spokesperson advised. Even though some manufacturers suggest otherwise, safety should always come first. Experts pointed out that while dishwashers were a standard household appliance, they could still pose risks if not used carefully. A simple adjustment in how utensils were placed could mean the difference between safety and tragedy. It was a minor precaution, something easily overlooked. Yet, one simple oversight had resulted in a heartbreaking loss. Experts urged people to be more mindful, to take even the smallest safety measures seriously, and to remember that even routine tasks could carry unexpected risks. These reminders resonated deeply with many who heard Jane's story, as they reevaluated their own household habits, and whether they were unknowingly putting themselves or their loved ones at risk. Jane's
Che bello allenarsi, ma se hai proprio i cattivi sui tuoi piedi, puoi usare l'abitudine.
And action.
Very exciting. We're all set with a new Swiss tourism ad with Hollywood icon.
family and friends were left in shock and grief. She had been full of life, yet in a single moment everything had changed. Reverend Colvin, who had so kindly opened her home to Jane, now found herself mourning a devastating loss. All right, folks, buckle up because this story is equal parts bizarre and tragic, with a side of facepalm-worthy decisions. Picture this. It's Friday, January 12th, 2007, and a morning radio show called The Morning Rave on KDND decides to host an on-air contest with a prize everyone wants. But it ended in a way no one could have imagined. Trapped in an underground elevator as floodwaters surged in, their final moments were spent battling for breath, desperately trying to escape as water filled the small space around them. Dean Shoshani and Stav Harari, both 25, had no idea they were stepping into a death trap when they entered the lift in their apartment building's underground parking garage. Heavy rain had been falling throughout the day, overwhelming the city's drainage systems and causing chaos on the streets. But the true nightmare began when the water found its way into the basement, seeping through an opening and quickly rising. As the elevator descended, an electrical failure suddenly caused the doors to lock. What should have been a quick and routine ride turned into a terrifying prison. Trapped inside, the couple struggled to force the doors open, but they wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the water levels rose around them. Neighbors could hear their desperate cries for help, but no one could get to them in time. Residents of the building immediately sprang into action, frantically calling emergency services. However, their pleas went unanswered for far too long. The city was already overwhelmed with flood-related emergencies, and their calls were either missed or dismissed. One tenant dialed for help repeatedly, only to be met with silence or disconnected calls. Time slipped away, and so did hope. The flooding intensified, and the underground parking garage became a deadly trap. The water had nowhere to go, pouring in rapidly, submerging everything in its path. The air inside the lift grew thinner as the couple fought to stay above the rising water. Their struggle could be heard, the sounds of their distress echoing through the basement. Then, just as suddenly, the noises stopped, silence fell, and with it came the realization that the worst had happened. By the time rescue crews finally arrived, it was too late. More than half an hour had passed, and every second counted. Emergency personnel had to navigate the flooded parking lot with scuba gear, searching through the murky water for any sign of life. When they finally managed to pull the couple out, paramedics rushed them to the hospital, but the battle had already been lost. Dean and staff were gone. In the aftermath, grief and anger swept through the community. The tragedy sparked outrage as questions surfaced about the building's infrastructure and the city's handling of the floods. Family members and neighbors pointed to years of poor maintenance, believing that the disaster could have been prevented if the building had better flood protection, if emergency services had responded faster, if the elevator had been designed differently. So many ifs haunted those left behind. Dean's family struggled to comprehend the loss, describing him as someone left behind a grieving family unable to imagine a future. Without her, the pain of their absence cut deep, leaving wounds that would never truly heal. For the city, this tragedy became a chilling reminder of how quickly nature's fury could turn everyday places into death traps. It